You've been very supportive of Israel in the war with Hamas, but very unsupportive of America helping Ukraine against Russia.
I think most of the wars that we fought over the past 100 years were immoral wars. We provided the provocation, which was our insistence, irrational insistence, of putting NATO into Ukraine. We were involved, of course, in the overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014, and then we put in our government sympathetic to the United States, which invited invited NATO into the country. Who's making all the money? Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed, Blackstone, all of our military contractors, who are the ones who wanted NATO in there. It's the most, according to the World Bank, it's the most corrupt country in the world.
I want to talk to you just separate to this about Israel and Ukraine, because you've been very supportive of Israel in the war with Hamas, but very unsupportive of America helping Ukraine against Russia. And I'm just curious how you see the ideological difference, because from where I sit, currently in London, but from where I sit, you have a Russian dictator illegally invading a sovereign democratic European country, and that country struggling to repel the Russian invader and desperately needing our help. And America remains the number one help it could possibly have, and we all know that. And so America's assistance to Ukraine may or may not determine whether they can stop a Russian victory. And in Israel, they are attacked by Hamas, October the 7th, horrendous attack. And they're responding, and they're trying to get their hostages, and there's a lot of controversy about how they are executing that war. But you're fully supportive of them responding to that invasion on October the 7th. How do you differentiate? I mean, obviously, they're different situations, but ultimately it's about the same kind of principle of a people being attacked and then having the right to defend themselves. And America is very supportive at the moment of both. Why do you object to one, not the other?
Yeah, it's contextual, Piers, and here's the reason. I'm anti-war. I think most of the wars that we fought over the past 100 years were immoral wars. I think the only war that we fought that was actually a moral war was World War II, because it wasn't a war of choice. It was a war where we were attacked. It was a defensive war. We were attacked by an implacable enemy. And it had declared its intention to destroy Western democracies, Western values, and to conquer the world, to establish essentially a German caliphate that they call the Third Reich. But most of our wars, including World War I, were wars of choice. My grandfather protested World War I, lost a lot of his friendships, but it was a war to benefit bankers and arms dealers. And I think the Ukraine war is the same. It's a war of choice. It's a war we should never have had. It's a war that President Putin, we provided the provocation, which was our insistence, irrational insistence, of putting NATO into Ukraine. We were involved, of course, in the overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014, and then we put in our government sympathetic to the United States, which invited NATO into the country, which since 1992, the Soviet leadership, long before Putin, was saying that's a red line for us, and Russia has good reason for that. We wouldn't let nuclear weapons be put in Cuba. I was there in 1962, and this is on his border. It's 4 minutes from Moscow, but for Aegis missile systems, we've already put the Aegis missile Tomahawk systems in Romania, in Poland. Russia has been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time they were invaded through Ukraine, Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. So they have a rational national security interest in making sure that Ukraine is not occupied by a hostile army. And, they've been very clear with us about that. Our own diplomats, from George Kennett, Bill Pierce, Bill Perry, the leading diplomats in our country have said, if you go into Ukraine, you're going to force a violent response from Russia. Now, even after that, Russia, after 2014, after we overthrew the government of Ukraine, Russia said, and Donbass and Lugansk voted to join Russia. Putin said, I don't want them. I don't want them. I want them to stay part of Ukraine, but let's have a treaty, the Minsk Accords. And the key part of the Minsk Accords is that Ukraine would remain neutral. We wouldn't put NATO in Ukraine. So Zelensky runs. He's an actor and a comedian, never been involved in politics, but he wins with 70% of the vote in a landslide. Why? Because he said, I'm going to sign the Minsk Accords and make peace with Russia. People of Ukraine wanted peace. And then what happens? The U.S. government, Victoria Nuland, and his own right-wing people within, Ukraine, forced him to pivot, so he didn't sign the accords. Putin then goes into the country, but he only sends 40,000 troops. Clearly, he doesn't want to conquer a nation of 44 million people, and Putin himself says this. He says, I just want them back at the negotiating table. The United States under Biden won't help him. So Zelensky goes to Naftali Bennett of Israel and to Erdogan in Turkey, and he says, will you help me negotiate a new peace agreement with Putin? Erdogan says yes. They negotiated with the former Israeli Prime Minister and Prime Minister Erdogan in Istanbul. They initial a treaty and the only thing they really want is that NATO doesn't go into Ukraine. And Putin, after they initial it, begins withdrawing his troops from Kiev. Then what happens? President Biden sends Boris Johnson in April of 2022 to the Ukraine and forces Zelensky to tear up that agreement. So we had peace in our hands, a very, very beneficial and satisfactory peace. And President Biden made Zelensky tear it up. Since then, there's been at least 500,000 Ukrainian kids who have died unnecessarily on the front line. And we are, and who's making all the money? Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed, Blackstone, all of our military contractors who are the ones who wanted NATO in there, because when NATO goes in there into a new country, those countries have to conform their weapons purchase specifications to NATO specifications.
Okay, all right. Listen, let me respond to you, because NATO has not gone into Ukraine, though. Ukraine is not a NATO member yet. If it was, then Putin wouldn't have invaded, because NATO has a duty to defend its members. Secondly, I would point out that Ukraine was well, hang on, let me finish. Ukraine was also urged to give up its nuclear defences, which now looks like a very stupid decision. Thirdly, in 2014, you've neglected to mention that Putin took Crimea. He also attacked Georgia. This is, to me, you're painting a very benevolent, trusting view of Vladimir Putin, someone who seems to me to be a pretty terrible Russian dictator who was former KGB, didn't like the fact the Soviet Union got broken up, and is now on a mission to restore as much of that power as he possibly can, whilst making himself extremely rich in the process and oppressing his people. I'm just curious why you're so generous towards him and so ungenerous towards Ukraine,
well,
who are in the end, they are a sovereign democratic European nation, and they were invaded not just by 40,000, they were invaded by a lot more than 40,000. I've been to Kyiv. There were 150,000 Russian troops on that border, and they committed massacres.
On the border.
Well, they committed massacres in places like Bucha, which were contemptible. They destroyed cities like Mariupol, completely destroyed them, and they've carried on trying to raise as much of Ukraine to the ground as they can. Well, so my question is, why are you so benevolent towards Putin and so trusting of him?
Well, I'm not trusting of Putin. I don't think you need to trust Vladimir Putin in order to see what happened in Ukraine. The U.S. it was involved in provocations, and if you look at the CIA. Piers spent $5 billion overthrowing the government through USAID in funding the Maidan revolution in 2014. It was only after we put our people in, and by the way, Victoria Nuland, the deputy director of the State Department, you can go on and listen to her taped conversations with the U.S. ambassador a month before the coup d'etat, in which she is picking the new heads of the Ukrainian cabinet. Vladimir Putin says this, and his rational response to that is to invade Crimea. I'm not excusing it, and I'm not excusing Putin's invasion of Donbass and Lugansk. It is rational, and it was predictable that Putin was not going to let the United States take away its only warm water port. The only way for him to control his warm water port in Vladivostok was to go into Crimea. And by the way, he didn't fire a shot. He didn't kill a single Crimean because they wanted him in there. They voted to have them in there. So I'm not defending Vladimir Putin. I know who Putin is, and he's very open about the fact that he kills his political enemies. He's not a nice guy.
Right. Would you be happy? Do you feel comfortable, Robert, with the idea of Putin winning this war? Do you not see it, as many do, as a precursor to a very dangerous shift in power in the global order if he does?
No, we've shifted the power by forcing this war on them. First of all, I'm not, what I'm saying is we should be negotiating with them. He's asked to negotiate. He's repeatedly asked to negotiate. But what would you give him? I'm not going to tell you what I would have given him. I'm running to be the leader of the country. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do in negotiation. But I spend my career has been about negotiations. I've negotiated 500 lawsuits. I know, and you don't trust the person on the other side of the negotiation. And I can imagine, I would negotiate something that looked like the Minsk Accords or looked like the April 2022 arrangement. Oh, and what we've done, Piers, we have destroyed American power. We have forced an alliance. We've demonstrated the weakness of American power in Europe. We've demonstrated the fact that we can't do what America is supposed to be able to do, which is to reclaim that country. That we're not able to. We can't get equipment over there. We forced Russia into a very dangerous alliance with China. We've made Putin immensely popular in his own country. We've forced the rise of BRICS, which is now threatening the domination of the American dollar as the global reserve currency. And we put Putin in a position where his economy is stronger than it's ever been and more independent from the world economy, which means he has the capacity to do bad things to the world economy.
But if you were president,
if you were stronger than ever.
All right, but if you're president come November and this war is still going on, as it's quite likely to be, how are you actually going to resolve it? Because Putin's not going to give up any of the land he's taken.
I would negotiate.
How, though?
I would negotiate.
Ukrainians don't want to give it.
Listen, I don't know if you know this. Piers. President Zelensky has passed a law in Ukraine making it illegal to negotiate with Putin. That you should always lead with diplomacy. That's what my uncle said. That the primary job of a president of the United States.
But we didn't do that with Hitler.
Was to keep our country out of war.
We didn't do that with Hitler.
Well, yeah, and I said that was the one war that was a moral war.
Yeah, but my point is we didn't deal with that German dictator. We didn't deal with him diplomatically. We dealt with him militarily.
Well, yeah, but so are you saying we should attack all dictators? That do you think that the Iraq
war? No, but I think if a sovereign. Last time I checked, America believed in defending and safeguarding democracy wherever it was in the world. And I share your misgivings about a lot of the military conflicts. I do think Ukraine, whether you like it or not, Ukraine is a democratic European country. It's no longer part of the Soviet Union.
It's semi-democratic, and it's the according to the World Bank, it's the most corrupt country in the world. And we have no idea where any of this money is going over there. There's no accounting. It's, and a lot of it clearly is going to enrich the oligarchs in that country, but we're killing kids unnecessarily. My own son fought in Ukraine, Piers. He went over there and fought in the Kharkiv offensive or the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. And, and this is not a good thing for our country. It is not a strategic interest in our country. It's not our job in our country to fight every dictator in the world.
And what if he, let me ask you this. What if he wins, Putin, and he then decides to invade one of the Baltic countries? What would your view be then?
I don't think there's any evidence that he wants to do that.
But what if he did?
And I don't think there,
what if he did?
Putin, listen, and, my answer to that would be strategic ambiguity. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. If he attacks a NATO country, we're obligated under those articles to go to support those countries.
But what if China? All right, well, let me expand it. What if China looks at America being supine in its defence of Ukraine, allowing Putin to win? Why would that not be just a massive green light to China to then take Taiwan, as they're desperate to do?
I think it's been a green light to China to show how weak we are in Ukraine and how depleted we are and how ineffective our equipment is.
Yeah, we'd be even weaker, surely. Wouldn't we be even weaker if we let him win?
What?
If we let Russia win?
I think that we look weak anyway, and I think we are weak now, and I think we're weak because of that our military equipment is bad, and that the morale within our military is bad, and I think that just getting in continual wars has been bad for our country. Try to name, Piers, we've spent $8 trillion on wars since 2000. Name one country that's better off because of those wars. Iraq is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We created ISIS. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran.
Yeah.
We drove 4 million refugees into Europe. We destabilized every country in Europe. You could trace that a straight line to Brexit in England. Oh, these are
you could argue. I mean, I agree with you, but I would put up an argument that the military operation in Afghanistan was justified in the sense that there had to be a big response to 9/11, and actually Al-Qaeda's ability to train in Afghanistan was severely dented by the military operation there. I didn't like the way it was suddenly ended because the Taliban just took back all the power that they'd lost. I would have liked a few thousand troops to have been left there, as America and the allies have done all around the world. But I do think that the ability to stop Al-Qaeda being as effective as they were was definitely a good result of the Afghanistan war.
Okay, well, you and I differ there. I don't think 20 years in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history, and then, inevitably turning it back to the Taliban, I don't think, and having all the people who were allied with us for 20 years and we promised to defend, knowing that ultimately we're going to have to leave and we would leave them at the mercy of their enemies. I don't think it was a good result.
But what you can't do, but surely what you can't do...
You and I will differ there.
OK, but surely what you can't do, you can't let a bunch of terrorists take down the World Trade Center and not respond, particularly if you know where they're all being trained and where they're being harboured. Similarly, you can't allow a Russian dictator to just march in... Hang on.
But Piers, I'm not arguing that.
Nor to me can you allow... Nor can you allow a Russian dictator to run into a European country.